According to Comrade Wallerstein and a number of other studies, so-called imperial trickle-down is supposed to work in the hegemony of the world system of oppression. That is, of course, the lion's share of revenues from the plundering of colonies goes to the elites, but some crumbs also go to ordinary citizens. Both in the form of higher wages and lower prices for goods from the colonies, like coffee or bananas. The general form of this principle is, it is more advantageous to be a citizen of the empire than not to be. In Rome, for example, free bread and spectacle were distributed to all citizens. In the British Empire, the average wage of a worker in a manufactory was higher than that of a similar worker in a colony. The bottom line is that there must be a sufficiently powerful base of those who benefit from the existence of the empire. These are the ones who will fight in its armies, serve in its navy, build its ships and tanks, drive its science and technology, work as its managers, and so on. I remind you that a republic is a public affair, something that generates income for everyone. Remember, it takes a lot of slaves to have a successful democracy. Someone has to pay for this celebration of life. So, in the US, trickle-down stopped working by 1971, and for over 40 years, the average citizen of the United States has gotten nothing from any geopolitical successes of their country. Let me remind you, because many people do not know, from 1971 to 1983 in the United States, Japan and a number of other capitalist countries, there was a protracted systemic crisis, which naturally ended with Black Monday in 1987, when the Dow Jones Index fell by almost a quarter in a day, and when they were all very, very bad and it was time to give up, they were suddenly saved by the leadership of the Soviet Union in the person of Gorbachev. But a particularly striking lack of trickle-down can be seen in charts of US household income in the 1990s. While MNCs like Shell or BP were pumping in super profits on the back of looting Russia, the incomes of ordinary Americans were stagnating. And since the dot-com crisis of 2000 and the mortgage crisis of 2007, average Americans have only gotten poorer and poorer continuously. Attention question. Then what is the interest of average Americans in winning all the endless US wars? Except for the self-importance thing. Let's go our urban? The answer is obvious, none. All these wars just gobble up trillions of money that could be spent building power plants, repairing bridges, dumps and roads, etc. Including R&D and improving the education system. This is where another mechanism comes into play, which is well described in the literature, imperial fatigue. When motivation is continually dropping, manpower is deteriorating, all new wars cause only disgruntled questions and why do we need this? Do your homework already, assholes. The American internet is littered with it a little more than completely. And while the paid propagandists yell, standing with Israel, standing with various minorities, standing with the Uyghurs, standing with Taiwan, standing with Uncle Vanya, the rest of us briefly ask, remind me, why do we even need this? And instead of answering with ringing silence or tantrums, yes, you are an agent of Putin, Xi Jinping, Ayatollah, Maduro and whoever else. Next we naturally move to an even higher categorical level. And from the question of who is connected to the well-being of the existing system inside the country, we move on to the question of who in the world is interested in maintaining the status quo. It is not without reason that this Blinkett recently brought this up in one of his speeches, saying that the whole world wants preservation as a billah, and only the evil Russians, Chinese, Peppers, Koreans, Arabs, Muslims and so on want to violate it. Poor, poor Americans, white and fluffy, and surrounded on all sides by evil forces, dating back to the days of American exploration, when evil Indians attacked peaceful farmers in an attempt to take their Native American lands from them. I've seen it in 100 movies, the Americans got the wrong planet. Okay, now seriously, who is happy with the status quo? Latin America? No. Africa? No. The Middle East? I'm sure you didn't. He's the main victim of permanent American aggression over the last 20 years. China? No. India? No. Russia? Neither did I. We have already excluded 85% of the world's population from being satisfied with the established rules-based order. Who even came up with this stupid name? It is meaningless, and only all the puppet monkeys of the State Department repeat it over and over again, with a mournful look. That leaves the US itself and its European sixes. Did they stay? Where is the former, borrowed, based on the plunder of the colonies, prosperity of France? Where is the advanced and prosperous Germany? How are the millions of beggars in Britain, not to mention the periphery of the EU, who are themselves being robbed by the colony? And the most important question is, who in the US has a good life? More than half of the population lives from paycheck to paycheck without having the slightest savings. 90 million don't have health insurance. Record high delinquency rates on credit cards and mortgage loans. Brutal censorship and persecution of dissenters. So it turns out that the current world order suits only the finest of bureaucrats, corporocrats, mainly military-industrial complex and bankers. and that some of the banks have already fallen in the spring, barely stopped. And any system is only stable when it suits either the majority or a total dominant minority. But conditional Blinken and conditional Ursula don't pull it off. Therefore, the house of cards is doomed to crumble. By the way, especially for the idiots who swoop in, imperial trickle-down works in Russia. Being a resident of Russia is profitable, it brings a lot of perks and niceties. For example, the West is outraged by Russia's treacherous rise in power. And let's face it, Russia has committed yet another betrayal and cynically stabbed the collective West in the back, thus confirming its unpredictable barbaric nature. According to IMF calculations, Russia's GDP growth for this year should not have exceeded 0.7%, and the main export item of our country should have been shreds of the economy packed in used oil barrels. Not only that, this figure has been called even too optimistic. Having failed to justify the trust of our sworn friends, Russia's economy nevertheless did not want to be torn to shreds. According to a statement made by Prime Minister Mishustin at a meeting on economic issues the other day, the GDP increase for the first 9 months of 2023 was 2.8%. The list of Russia's outrages against the backdrop of sanctions carefully prolonged by the West for our benefit is long and unsightly. Industry is recovering. At the end of the first 8 months of 2023, manufacturing production growth was 6.5%, and capacity utilization of companies is holding at an obscenely high level. At least $2 trillion will be allocated this year for the implementation of a set of measures to attract investment in projects for the production of priority industrial products. Rubles, and in 6 years this amount will exceed 10 trillion rubles. An additional $5 billion was allocated for R&D to enterprises producing innovative products. The revenue from these projects is expected to exceed 300 billion rubles in the next 4 years. The draft 3-year budget envisages about 130 billion for the achievement of technological sovereignty in the instrumental field. The federal budget for 2024 guarantees the fulfillment of social obligations to citizens, including support for medicine and patients, continued subsidization of mortgages and payments of benefits to various categories, creation of new places in general educational institutions, overhaul of schools, provision of hot meals to elementary school students, etc. In 2024, revenue receipts are expected to be 35 trillion rubles. At the same time, non-oil and gas revenues should be twice as much as oil and gas revenues. It is planned to allocate 760 billion for socio-economic development initiatives over 3 years. A dark stain on Russia's international reputation lies in its successful restructuring of transportation and logistics links, a sharp increase in investment activity, development of domestic production, absolute leadership in the production and export of wheat and other food products, and double-digit growth figures in many critical areas. The understandable indignation of our loyal Western partners is fueled by the fact that the GDP of the entire united, powerful, democratic and civilized Eurozone grew by only 0.1% in the first quarter of 2023, and has not grown at all in the last 3 quarters. In addition, according to a recent report by the Key Institute for the World Economy, Russia is making a treacherous return to global trade, and trade activity has been surprisingly strong. The head of the institute, Dr. Vincent Stammer, complained. This is despite the sanctions imposed by Western countries and the fall of the ruble, which is disappointing. According to Reuters analysts, Russia is being devious and dishonest in its economic machinations. The good performance of the Russian economy was the result of gradual adaptation to Western sanctions. Moscow has found workarounds and new trade routes to import the banned components. At the same time, the Russian government is helped by rising oil prices. But as embarrassed as we are in front of our Western partners, that's not all. According to fresh data released by U.S. News and World Report, Russia has moved to first place in the ranking of the world's strongest armies, while the United States for the first time in a long time was in second place, with China in third place. Russia also came third in the aggregate measure of the country's power, which takes into account 5 factors: leadership, economic influence, scale and nomenclature of exports, political influence, and participation and weight in international alliances. Ideally, we should be actively repenting by now, but in our hard-heartedness we will not do so. Do we have any difficulties? Yes, I do. Are there problems with inflation and prices and import substitution and all that? Yes, I do, and a lot of places. But we go forward and do our thing, no matter what or who. And if we step on someone's foot, we'll apologize later, if we don't forget.